Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, depending whether you're UK side or state side. My name is Martin Garrett. I'm Chief Exec at Cambridge Cleantech. I'm just going to say a couple of words to begin with about housekeeping, and then just provide some background as to what Cambridge Cleantech is doing to support our members at the moment. And then I'm going to hand over to who you've really come to hear from, our range of speakers on what is happening in the USA at the moment. Some of you may have noticed there's been a change in administration, some might say for the better, on the state side. So we'll come back to that in a second. But first of all, a couple of points on housekeeping. If you can remain muted, please. And if you have any questions, please do type them in the chat box, which is in the center console at the bottom of your screen. We are going to be recording the event as well, just so that you know. So if you have any concern about that, do shout up now. And of course, we have Oriane with us to undertake the supervision for the event and to problem solve if any issues should arise. We're also going to be having some meeting rooms at the end of the session, so you're welcome to stay for those and join and have a bit of a sort of an informal round table and have a chat with each other. We have some specialists with us today on various topics. I see Mike Taylor's here, for example, with his sales expertise background. So enough on the housekeeping and background to the event. A little bit about Cambridge Cleantech and what we're doing at the moment. We're very keen, as you know, to support our members and our businesses, in particular with opportunities with corporates. So if you take a look at our website at the moment, you'll see that a company called First Base, which is the Rail Workers Pension Fund, are actually looking for innovations at the moment in terms of smart cities. They've got developments across the Oxford to Cambridge arc in both Cambridge, Oxford, and in fact in Milton Keynes in the centre as well. So they're open and scouting for new ideas for building technology and smart cities. Do take a look at our website and please do respond to them if you have any products or services that could be of use for them. Keep an eye on our events page of our website, because those types of opportunities crop up and are detailed on the website all of the time. And of course, we're also keen to promote access to finance for our members. One of our there are the sort of key requirements that they tell us about regularly. So just 2 weeks ago, we had a Cleantech Venture Day. We had 24 of some of the most innovative and investment-ready companies pitched to a room full of investors who are focused on the cleantech sector. We had 50 cleantech investors in the room, in the digital room on our new platform. And as a result of the Cleantech Venture Day itself, there were over 55 meetings requested at the behest of the investors with the innovators. So delighted with that. Later in the year, in October, just before COP26, we'll be doing another pre-COP26 Cleantech Venture Day. And it's also our 10th anniversary year as well in October. So we'll be celebrating both things over a couple of days, a bit of a sort of look back at our impact and look to the future on the first day, then a Cleantech Venture Day on the second day. So watch out for the application process opening for that Venture Day just after the summer. So a bit of background on Cambridge Cleantech, and I think what I'd really like to do now, I've already mentioned the fact that there have been obviously some very clear changes in the USA in terms of the administration, which we think should be positive for the cleantech sector. And I'm delighted to say that we have with us live from Washington, Andy Barnes, who's the Director of Policy and Communications at Clean Energy, which is a business network group. And he's going to provide a bit of an update for us on what has been happening in the USA and what might be to come in terms of policy changes and therefore opportunities for cleantech companies within the UK as we seek to look at the market in the USA. So Andy, over to you. I think you're doing a presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Martin, for that introduction. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Bear with me momentarily as I shift into presenter mode. Really excited to be with you all today. Can you see my slides okay? Good.
Yeah.
Great. So as you mentioned, my name is Andy Barnes. I serve as Director of Policy and Communications at the Clean Energy Business Network. It's an honor to be with you all today to talk about the changes that are going on right now with respect to US climate policy and what it means for clean energy deployment. So I've been asked to speak about the policy changes that are going on right now with the new administration. So I'm going to walk through some of the policy changes that have already taken place and what to expect as the US re-enters the Paris Agreement. Before I do, a little bit about our organization really quickly. The Clean Energy Business Network is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We serve as the US small business voice for the clean energy economy. And what we really try to do is push clean energy forward through policy support, mainly at the federal level in the United States, market and technology education, as well as business development. Our membership is pretty broad and diverse. We have a little over 5,000 clean energy business leaders in our network in all 50 states that run the gamut from solar efficiency, wind, advanced grid technologies. So it's very diverse, both technologically and geographically across the US. Two quick resources I wanted to point out that are on our website, www.cbn.org, that might be relevant to this audience. We operate a Cleantech funding database that aggregates information related to funding opportunities across the clean tech innovation ecosystem for early stage businesses in the US. In addition, we also operate a business directory where folks are able to connect with some of our premium members. With that, I'll jump into the topic at hand. So obviously, Joe Biden now occupies the White House, and first order of business for him was putting in place personnel to run his government. I bring this up, this is a photo of his cabinet. And I bring this up not to put these people on a pedestal, but I bring them up for several reasons. One, Biden's appointments for energy and climate policy demonstrate a high priority for this space. He has brought together a group of individuals with deep climate policy experience in this area, and he's brought a lot of them on board. In addition, he's created a new entity called the White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy to coordinate these efforts. So from a sheer numbers perspective, he's already demonstrated the emphasis he's going to place on climate change and building out a decarbonized economy. In addition, he's signaled his intent to approach climate change in ways that previous administrations have not done. What do I mean by that? One, he's prioritizing climate across the entire federal government.
Andy, we seem to have lost your voice.
Uh-oh.
Oh, you're back now. That's it.
So I was muted.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
We can now, yes. That's a relief. Yeah, we thought something else had gone wrong, but if it was just an accidental mute, that's probably good. Thank you. Back over to you. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Did you catch the personnel slide? I'm just trying to catch where I was muted.
Sorry, yes, we got the personnel slide. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. All right, so sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I've got a new share here. Bear with me. So again, jumping back into it, so he's signaled this new approach to addressing climate change and clean energy, prioritizing climate across the entire federal government. This whole government approach means that all federal agencies are going to be exploring how each of them can contribute to his climate change agenda. So some good examples of this include the US Treasury, for instance. So there are efforts underway right now related to reporting requirements for financial risk related to climate change. Or at the US Postal Service, where there are proposals to shift all of our mail trucks, I think you might call these lorries in the UK, to electric vehicles. He's also weaving climate across multiple domains, including national security, foreign policy, economic policy. So, for instance, John Kerry, our former Secretary of State, in his new role as climate envoy, has a seat on the National Security Council. In addition, Brian Deese, who is a former Obama climate clean energy aide, runs the National Economic Council. And then thirdly, he's really refocused, or sorry, I should go to the second point here. He's refocusing clean energy investment around jobs. He has created a new position called Director of Energy Jobs, and his infrastructure plan, I'll dive into a little more in depth shortly, is called the American Jobs Plan. He repeatedly talks about how efforts to address climate change should make people think of jobs. In addition to this, he's overlaying this work through the lens of environmental justice, ensuring that those communities that have been left behind in economic growth and opportunity, as well as have been disproportionately impacted by pollution and climate change, are a central focus of these plans. So his cabinet and his political appointees and staff are much more diverse than previous administrations. And he has pledged that 40% of the benefits of his infrastructure plan will go to underrepresented communities. And in addition, an entity called the White House Council on Environmental Quality will be coordinating cross-agency action on environmental justice. So there's a lot of emphasis on US presidencies on what gets done in the first 100 days. So jumping into the first 100 days, on day one, as Biden campaigned, he issued a memo to rejoin the Paris Agreement. 30 days later, the US officially rejoined. We have not yet, or the US government, I should say, has not yet announced its nationally determined contribution. That'll be upcoming. I'll get to that shortly. On day one, he also rescinded the Keystone XL pipeline, which runs into Canada across the border, and placed a moratorium on Arctic oil and gas leasing. He published a regulatory freeze memo halting rulemaking that the Trump administration was trying to get through on their way out the door. In addition, he issued an executive order calling for a review of all agency actions taken by the Trump administration, which calls out specific rules with clear timelines for publishing proposed revisions. So a few of these of interest include methane standards for existing oil and gas operations, fuel economy standards for cars and light duty vehicles over the next 5 years, building appliancy and efficiency standards, as well as emission standards for coal plants. Then he, a week after he was inaugurated, he had Climate Day, not to be confused with his Climate Summit, where he set the initial markers for his climate and clean energy agenda. This included reestablishing an interagency working group to publish interim social cost of greenhouse gases, so carbon, nitrous oxide, and methane. And they've set that social cost of carbon at $51 a ton. In addition, he signed 3 executive orders that establish climate change as a key factor in national security, foreign policy decision-making, seek to boost union clean energy jobs in an equitable fashion, and restore scientific integrity across the US government. He also announced he would send the Kigali Amendment, which phases down HFCs, to the US Senate for ratification, and he also kicked off the NDC arrangement, so setting the target under the Paris Agreement. He also directed the federal agencies to procure carbon-free electricity and zero-emission vehicles, halted new oil and gas leasing on public lands, and established a working group on a just transition for coal communities. Worth noting, he also said he would push to electrify the roughly 650,000 vehicles in the US government fleet. And then he also announced his Climate Leaders Summit is going to be held on April 22nd, Earth Day. And this is really intended to showcase his plans for his climate and clean energy agenda, to demonstrate to the international community that the US is back, and to hopefully spur other international leaders to ramp up ambition. So I should also mention he has released an infrastructure plan, which I'll dive into shortly. And then most recently, he sent his federal budget request to Congress. So this is his discretionary request, is a very high level overview of his priorities for the federal budget. So on the potential US nationally determined contribution, as I mentioned, Biden is hosting his Leaders Summit on Climate on Earth Day. He is expected to announce the US nationally determined contribution on or before this day. So I should mention that many stakeholders are pushing for this target to be at least 50% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030. I should note that the US's previous target under Obama was, I believe, 26 to 28% reductions over 2006 emissions baseline by 2030. So this would roughly double that ambition. In addition to that, it's rumored that they're going to formally set a mid-century net zero target as well. So this is something that he campaigned on. So the infrastructure proposal, this was a big deal. So the US Congress has been dealing with responding to the COVID crisis and has passed several bills to provide relief to the US economy and assist in dealing with that public health crisis. Once they got that passed, they shifted to, Biden shifted to his infrastructure proposal. So he has sent an outline of this proposal to Congress. It is roughly $2 trillion, and it covers at a high level roads, bridges, and airports, sort of what you think of normally when you think of infrastructure. In addition, the electricity grid and clean energy, as well as expanding broadband internet access, in particular across rural America. In addition, there's components for caregiving. In terms of clean energy, there's a lot of items in there. He's really made clean energy development and deployment a central pillar of this infrastructure plan. There's $174 billion for electric vehicles. So this includes building out 500,000 EV charging stations across the US, as well as providing incentives for electric vehicle deployment. There's also language in there related to electric transmission. We have unique challenges in the US in terms of jurisdiction. So crossing state lines with transmission gets a little tricky, and basically his proposal would try to explore areas to streamline permitting for this, as well as provide funding. He's also proposing expanding tax credits. There's an investment tax credit and production tax credit in the US for wind and solar and other renewable technologies. He's proposed extending those 10 years and also adding storage to this list. He's proposing powering the US government facilities by 100% clean energy 24/7. And then I should note, this is probably an item that was tucked in there that is crucial, but was overlooked by a lot of folks: the energy efficiency and clean energy electricity standard. So he referenced this policy mechanism in his infrastructure proposal. Essentially, what this would do is set a standard for electricity providers to ramp up their carbon-free electricity generation to 80% carbon-free by 2030, and then 100% by 2035. So that kind of underpins his plan to decarbonize the U.S. power sector. Then in addition, there are investments for a just transition, as well as sort of a green bank, a federal green bank. We have several green banks in the U.S. at the state level. His proposal would essentially create one at the federal level that would dole out block grants to state green banks for clean energy deployment. And then in addition, there's $35 billion for clean energy research, development, and deployment across federal agencies. And then I should also mention there is a lot of focus on abandoned oil and gas wells, providing funding to cover and retire these gas wells. Some of them have been just left orphaned as companies go bankrupt, as well as recovering, reclaiming abandoned mines.
Another couple of minutes, please, Andy. Just 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then so really quickly, the federal budget, he proposed his high-level overview of the federal budget recently, 1.5 trillion. This is separate from his $2 trillion infrastructure proposal. So it's roughly 50-50 defense, non-defense. There's a lot in there for clean energy, retrofitting homes, schools, and federal buildings in terms of energy efficiency, $600 million for EV, electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. And then I should also mention clean energy R&D. There's boosting and funding for these programs as well. In addition to creating an entirely new entity called ARPA-C, which is modeled after ARPA-E. So this is Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy. This would form ARPA-C, which would stand for ARPA Climate, I believe. So this would focus on accelerating innovation across the climate tech space. And again, the federal budget referenced the energy efficiency and clean electricity standard. So I should mention that this proposal, is now in Congress's hands. It's up to Congress to decide what to do. There is no consensus on, whether or not an electricity standard is the way that they're going to go, but it seems like the most likely path. So what's next? The U.S. will be announcing its NDC, as I mentioned, on Earth Day. The federal budget will be worked on by Congress, and then the president will have to sign it. The fiscal year begins September 1st this year, so they're going to try to get that done by September, by October. And then the infrastructure plan, they will be working on that this summer and this fall. In addition, I mentioned some of the federal rules that they were going to propose to rescind or revise. Some of those are oil and gas, as well as fuel economy standards, and then efficiency standards, as well as new standards for coal plants. So that at a high level is what's going on in the US in terms of federal policy. Obviously, it's a new era. In the US, we have a government that is a little bit more forward-leaning on some of the things that we care about. And we look forward to the progress ahead. So with that, this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out should you have any questions, and happy to answer any questions at the end.
Andy, thank you very much indeed for that. I must say I had no idea how much detail is actually being worked on and taken forward to implementation by the current administration. I think the UK press is maybe thinking that the current US president is not so much, I'm going to use the word exciting as was his predecessor in terms of newsworthiness, but clearly a lot of things are happening in terms of detail, and I think that will provide some opportunities for UK clean tech companies as we go forward. So thank you very much indeed for that overview. That set the context really well. And I think now, having heard that, it's ideal for me to hand over to Morgan Pierstoff, who's going to tell us about a roadmap for how you can take your clean tech company into the US market. And Morgan, of course, works for Newable. Morgan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate being able to be a part of this event, Martin, and Oriana in the background, supporting us, and to be working with Cambridge Cleantech and all the other partners that are here today. So thanks very much, everyone, for your attention. Andy, of course, just really laid out a very clear picture that there's so many things changing in the US, and as a result, so many opportunities to take advantage of. He also alluded to some challenges because of the nature of the state and federal system that make doing business in the US a bit complicated. And so that's really what I'll be talking about today, is to try to offer some solutions for you all as companies to really seize the opportunity that's existing right now, particularly in this sector in the US. My name is Morgan Pierstoff, so I'm the Business Development and Sales Director for Newable Avitas, which is the American Made Easy brand. Just a little bit about us: we're a joint venture. It's really important to have local expertise and resources on the ground in the US to help guide you, which is what I'll be talking about. Newable is based here in London in the UK, and we're both specializing in small and mid-size enterprise support. So that's a through line for both of us. Avitas Group is in the United States and have a team of over 400 doing business in all 50 states. So we have that on the ground expertise through our joint venture. Overall, we're trying to give you operational solutions to be able to execute your strategies that you're developing based on the content that Andy and others are sharing today. We've got a lot of different ways to do that, just previewing them here, everything from tax to accounting to payroll, recruiting, IT, marketing, all essential aspects of business that don't necessarily drive revenue, but you got to think about as you expand into any new market. And of course, you have to think about that in the US as well. So before I really dive more into the service side, I thought it was helpful just to illustrate again why you need some support, why you need a partner in the market, and have some maps to help me illustrate that, if you'll indulge me. So first of all, the sheer size and scale of the marketplace. So here, juxtaposing the United Kingdom over the United States, you're looking at the sheer size and have to think about really how will you adapt your business to serve a market that is 40 times larger than the United Kingdom. It means likely you can't copy and paste your strategy even within this sector. So thinking about that. Expanding upon that a little bit further, there are 11 states alone which are larger in landmass than the UK. So an additional layer of complexity, but it also means that you can find success operating at even the regional level in the United States, which is exciting. When you think about a state, for example, like California, you're looking at a gross domestic product, which is similar to the United Kingdom as shown in this map. And it's not just the case with California, there being a lot of opportunities. And of course, we're talking about clean technologies, but there are really interesting clusters across the United States within green energy and technologies. And of course, the infrastructure changes that are going to be happening with the Biden administration are happening all across the United States. So looking at the scale of the opportunity, even in a single state in the US, is really important. But again, there's complexity. This graphic, I think, really shows it in the sense that the US isn't evenly distributed. So when you think about a physical location, potentially in the United States for your business, you've got to think about where to put it to really use your resources most efficiently and deal with the fact that really the bulk of the US population is living east of the Mississippi River. If you have all of your opportunity on the West Coast, that's one thing. But if you're trying to serve all of the market, you can't necessarily do it from one location. So maybe you start on one part of the United States and expand later to maybe to an East and West Coast facility or distribution center. So again, you've got to think about that scale in all of these terms. The last kind of map that I'll show here is this one. This is a map of US counties. So there are over 3,100 counties in the United States, so local levels of jurisdiction, which is what each one of these little light gray lines is representing. So as a foreign investor into the US market, how do you ensure compliance across tax, labor laws, and any other regulatory frameworks that might exist, which do differ from state to state? So it's a lot to think about, but that's why you need a partner. That's why you need experts on the ground to really help guide you. That's essentially what American Made Easy is and why we exist, because we do have that expertise. We try to really provide you a turnkey solution. I listed all those services out beforehand, so you're not having to juggle a million different service providers. You can go to someone who's already doing business in all 50 states, has experts on the ground across a dozen offices, and can therefore help you stay compliant and really lower the risk of having an expansion in the US. So There are two ways that you might approach an expansion in the US, and my presentation is all about kind of navigating and having that roadmap. Some of you on the call might be quite advanced in the marketplace. Maybe you're already ready to set up an entity. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but there are some things that you can do at an early stage before you overly entangle yourself in the market to really test and validate exactly the opportunities that Andy has been mentioning. So I'm first going to talk about those. We often get the question from companies, how do you really, just kind of dip a toe in the water? How do you test the market? And there are three kind of different ways that you might approach it, which probably aren't a huge surprise to you all. Oftentimes it's exploring it. It's getting that on the ground intelligence, maybe testing talent. Is it a key person on the ground that's going to be important for you? And pipeline development. Obviously, you want to see if you can generate the inquiries and interest that'll drive your business growth forward. So we've got a few different ways that if one of these resonates with you, that we can be further of help, and it might be a good solution, and want to mention those. So those primarily kind of fall in doing your homework and planning, of course. So thinking about research and digital tools that you might employ. My first question would be to any business that's looking at expanding further into the US to leverage some of these opportunities is to see, have you really done a proper market check to understand what regulations might affect you, to understand the pricing of your competitors, to really start to establish your brand and a strategy that can help penetrate the market. So if that's not something that you've done, having a team on your side, if you don't have the capacity internally, it's really important to tick that box and make sure you've done that. Secondly, if you've maybe already done that step, but you haven't really done a proper competitive analysis, done apples to apples comparison of your marketing materials, your strategy across the competitive landscape, and that's also something that you need to do to be sure that your brand is resonating with the US consumer, being that the market is so large. There are so many regional nuances and differences that you have to think about. So we often work with companies to help with translating their brand into the American market. And once you've done that, once you have your brand, you feel strong about it and feel that you're resonating well with those consumers, you also need to have a digital strategy to implement. You need to have be investing in a monthly spend to really establish market leadership. So have you budgeted for something like that? Do you have the team to help you execute something like that? We help a lot of companies with executing and developing a digital strategy to support their business aspirations in the US market. Again, all things that you can do operating kind of virtually from afar. You might, though, decide that having people on the ground to talk to potential customers and to live and breathe the company is quite important. There's a lot of things that you might want to look out for and just be aware of on the employment and HR side in the US. So just a few considerations that I wanted to point out. So if you have a full-time employee in the United States, then businesses are required to collect and remit federal and state taxes for full-time or W-2 workers in the United States. What is a W-2 worker? That kind of burden of classification for a full-time worker is placed onto the employer in the United States. So it's important to make sure that if you have an independent contractor, you're using that model, which is fine, that they truly are an independent contractor, because you don't want to get that classification wrong in the US, because it is your responsibility. The next point that I wanted to make is you need to, with a full-time employee in the US, think about things like workers' compensation insurance, which is mandated at the state level and is required in, I believe, 48 of the 50 states. So it's important to have in place. And I think for UK companies that are looking at the US, benefits is something to consider as well. It's not the same, not having a national health service. Majority of Americans are really getting health benefits through their employers. So have you thought about how you might deliver that to the talent that you're hoping to attract and retain in the US? So you've got a lot of options for how to go about getting people in the US. If you're going the agent independent contractor route, if they are in fact independent, that's a great option. But if you're wanting something more like a full-time employee, there is a lot that you have to prepare for. I'm not intending for you to read all of these different columns of information, but it just kind of gives you an idea of all the types of compliance and boxes to tick when it comes to payroll, HR, benefits, and safety and risk management for full-time employees within your business. Certainly, you don't likely have the capacity to deal with something like this, and you might need a partner. So that's the type of HR support that you might leverage a company like ourselves to help streamline for you as you think about having talent on the ground. What are the means that we do that? One of the ways we streamline it is leveraging what many might be familiar with as an employer of record model. So essentially, if you're thinking, you know what, I don't want to go in and hire my own full-time people, but it'd be great to have someone working for me all the time in the US to be driving forward our strategy, meeting with potential customers in normal times, that type of thing. This is that type of a solution. So essentially, it allows you to have a US team on the ground without having to set up an entity. Normally, to provide insurance and meet those requirements that I talked about on the slide before, you'd need to have your own entity. So with a structure like this, you can work with a company to really de-risk your expansion by having them take care of the taxes associated with that individual, but still leverage all of the benefits of having a business development person on the ground, 100% dedicated to your company, and instead you're not having to worry about the payroll tax accounts and things like that. So that's one model that could be of interest to you as a company if you're thinking about having boots on the ground. It's something that's relatively simple to get in place. Every company is different. Sometimes you might have someone in mind that you're just looking to hire. Other times you might need help with recruiting. So depending on the need, it's a process of really consultation with a company to understand who they're looking for, who's the right person, who has the right experience and industry knowledge to allow them to be successful. And in a model like this, it's something where you only have to have a 30-day notice period. So again, if you need to refocus on the United Kingdom or another market, it's something that you can really tidy up quite quickly if you needed to exit, but hopefully it allows you to build a strong foundation for future growth. It's also something that allows you to have speed to market. So again, the process of setting a company up can take time. So companies that might want to use a validation pilot type of model might choose it to be able to quickly get someone employed in the US. So again, 3 to 6 weeks on average through a model like this would allow you to have someone on the ground in the US. The hope is, of course, that after having someone to drive business, that you're starting to generate revenues and that you want to really set up a business to really transact through in the United States. There's a lot of reasons you might want to consider setting up a company in the United States. Limiting your risk exposure is certainly one of them. Of course, the business you're transacting through is liable should you be sued. So having an entity in the US separate from your UK parent can have a lot of advantages from a legal perspective. You might also think about operational reasons that could benefit your company. So, at some point having your own bank account, being able to transact more easily with customers and suppliers, get insurance in place, could be an operational reason to set up a company. And lastly, business development. Sometimes having a company just shows that you're serious about the market. There's a lot of interesting companies that are also in the United States already. They're going to benefit from some of these investments in clean technology, and you need to be able to compete with them. So you want to be on level footing, and having an entity there and a presence there can allow you to do that. A few slides back, I'd shown you that kind of option 1, option 2, a validation pilot. We've just covered that, the validating the market. Now expanding, a full expansion, setting up a company. Once you do take that step, for the reasons that I've just described, there are a number of different things you've got to get in place. That's why you want to do it at the right time, because it really starts to entangle you from a regulatory perspective, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but it just costs money, right? So be sure that it is the right time for you to go into the market. Once you get there, hopefully you've done the research, you've done your homework, but now you need to set up a company, open a bank account, set up your US chart of accounts that are GAAP accounting compliant, start to file and pay taxes. All of these types of things are going to start to come into your business planning. Again, you might want to partner like ourselves to outsource some of these non-revenue generating functions so that you can really focus on your overall business activities. So that's exactly the type of support and guidance that we'd be giving as really a kind of consultative partner. It's important to keep in mind as you're planning, of course, budgeting for these types of services and things you might want in the long term, but also from a timing perspective. The US is open and welcome for business, but sometimes things take time dealing with the federal and state governments. So if you're thinking I need a visa, then that's going to be 6-12 months. Other things are quite quick. Setting up an entity might be 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the state and their processes. But it's good to just keep in mind what you're wanting to do and working backwards in terms of your plan and roadmap for the US. So I just like to show these timelines to give you a little bit of an idea. So I've gone quickly over many of the services that you might use to navigate an expansion. I just want to kind of come back together on what the core ones are that I think are relevant for those that might be listening. Again, entity formation. It's something you don't want to get wrong in the US. There are different structures for your entity. There are certain steps that you need to take to comply to federal laws as well as state laws. You need to get all your corporate documents in order so that you have a strong foundation and also have the lowest tax presence that's well suited for your business. You don't want to have too many registrations where you don't need them and have to have a more onerous tax burden as a result. So getting that right from the beginning, taking a holistic view is quite important, and that's what we help companies do. Again, if people is important to your business, not every UK company is going to have boots on the ground in the US, but if you think at some point you might need them, think about some more flexible options to allow you to scale up or to scale down as you need to, so you're not having a lot of overhead. It could be that a model that I talked about, an employee of record model, could work for you. It could be that you just need help recruiting people. The culture is different in the US, and getting the right expertise is really important. So thinking about that as an opportunity. And then finally, for that kind of longer term full expansion into the market, there are certain business processes that you're going to need to plan for as a business, everything from accounting to taxes to marketing. So it just gives you kind of an idea of the things that you should be planning for now. Every company is a little bit different. Our approach is to provide holistic support. So it always starts with the conversation. I know we've got breakout rooms open after this, so I'd be happy to talk to you about your unique circumstances and where you might fall into, but always happy to customize our advice and help you all out in that regard. So this is my information. I was trying to be quick because I only had 15 minutes, and I see Martin's unmuted. So I think I'm right on time. Yeah, I look forward to talking with people in the breakouts and taking questions as appropriate. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Morgan, for rattling through that. You must have seen that your 2-minute warning was going to be
I saw
up on the screen if if you didn't finish those. So thank you very much for keeping to time. So we've heard, first of all, from Andy, who set the context about what the opportunities are in North America. Now we've just heard about those practical steps you can take to set up your business, the various stages along the way, and the different types of where you might approach that in the US, from testing the market through to setting up your own company eventually within the country. And now, last but not least, we're going to hear from Guy Pattison, who's the chief exec of Stronger Stories. I think I first met Guy down at your London office several years ago, quite a while back. And at the time, you were beginning to take companies over to the United States on Clean+Cool missions with the support of Innovate UK. And of course, you've been able to do that until the last 12 months. So you're going to take us through your experience of doing that the last time you were able to go, which was to San Francisco just over 12 months ago. Guy, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Or good morning, I guess, if you're dialing in from the States. So yes, we're also celebrating a 10th anniversary, Martin. And lots of things have changed. I'm sure, I don't know if you've had a moment to kind of reflect, but, within Cleantech, I guess 10 years ago, there's a lot of hardware. There's now a lot of software. Investment has changed. The type of investors clearly has changed massively. The kind of amount that, the fact that crowdfunding didn't exist 2010 and it is so well established today. And thankfully, probably also a reflection that, a lot of kind of white male, middle-aged innovators and kind of chief execs have been joined by, more female entrepreneurs and greater sort of ethnic diversity of entrepreneurship as well. So everything going in the right direction, which is great. How I got to this point actually is that I started my career in financial PR. So reporting to the city, and it was very technical, dry, precise. And then I moved into sports sponsorship and working for like the Premier League globally, the Olympics, and it's like the opposite end of communication. So lots of passion, lots of endeavor, lots of journey, lots of emotion. And in a way, I kind of see those two things as sort of representing almost both sides of innovation and entrepreneurship in Cleantech in the UK and in the US. The UK was still quite dry and technical and precise. And my sort of, every time I sort of hit the US, I'm really infused and inspired by the amount of vision and purpose and emotion that's kind of put around Cleantech by the entrepreneurs. And it's that I just thought I'd kind of share a few thoughts with you about. So yes, we've been, the organization is a social enterprise, and we've been running Clean+Cool as a not-for-profit platform as part of that. In the 10 years, we've taken 120 CEOs over to the US, and they've kind of gone on to secure a significant amount of funding, which has been brilliant, and quite a few of, if they've not established themselves physically in the US, they've been able to, kind of find those customers and partners that they've been able to use to grow their businesses. Probably when I'm sort of reflecting, because people always kind of say, a bit like investors, I guess, can you kind of pick winners? What is it about the kind of companies that do succeed in the US? I'm sort of like left with this thought, that so often it's kind of the right person in the right place at the right time with the right story. And I guess that's a sort of an innovation paradox that everyone is kind of familiar with, that it's not necessarily the kind of the best innovation or the kind of correct solution that wins out. Very often it's the people who have got the biggest profile, the loudest voice, the ones that have kind of commanded attention, that are able to kind of win that support to kind of go from startup to kind of scale up. And the experience of being over in the US, and it feels like it doesn't feel like January last year. It feels like it was sort of 3 years ago. But one of the things that we sort of did during the week was join a group just before demo day, and we were talking to some of the entrepreneurs, and that like for like, they were pretty much kind of peers of their kind of UK contemporaries in terms of sort of stage of business and journey that they'd kind of been on, a market opportunity they were looking at. And they had spent that almost 5 solid days before the kind of demo day pitching and rehearsing relentlessly, up on stage, under lights with a microphone, again and again and again, and watching it, it was almost as if it kind of reached the level of kind of TED Talk and kind of beyond. And I think for the UK entrepreneurs, they're always kind of taken aback by this. And it's not just the sort of performative aspect on stage, it's every aspect. So it's the succinctness of elevator pitching when you're kind of networking in a room. It's the expertise in a kind of sales meeting for people to be able to kind of like flex what they're offering based on the conversation, and more than that, based on the story that the person they're talking to is telling themselves, like really understanding what it is that we kind of need to do to kind of connect to each other. And that's something I just think as a whole, the UK could definitely learn more from the US, but at the moment we're slightly sort of dismissive of. So for the kind of next few minutes that I've got, and I'll sort of apologise to Morgan and Andy certainly in advance, but I'm deliberately being a bit playful and provocative with stereotypes to try and kind of get my message across. But a true story at the end of that demo day, when we were chatting to one of the investors kind of casually, and he was kind of saying, if I'm listening to an American pitch, I hear what they say, and then I know that I probably have to halve it. If I'm listening to a Brit pitch, I'm hearing what they're saying, and then I know that they're probably playing themselves down, and I ought to kind of like double it. And the really interesting thing for me was, we had a kind of good laugh, but was all the Brits kind of used that as a reason not to change, not to do anything differently. That it was their sort of excuse for, being a bit sort of clumsy when it came to kind of presenting, and hiding behind lots of words on kind of slides, and really not kind of seeing it as an opportunity to improve the communication of their idea. There's another sort of well-known investor that's kind of right at the heart of kind of Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley in the Bay Area is where we targeted kind of most of our trips. And Ben Horowitz has kind of got a great saying, which storytelling is the most underrated skill of a CEO today, and he talks about it a lot in his book, The Secrets of Sand Hill Road, which I really kind of recommend to people. But the great thing about this kind of quote is the word skill, because if it's a skill, it can be learned. And really that's the biggest difference between an American entrepreneur's approach to communicating and kind of pitching their idea and the approach that we have here in the UK. There's a lot more attention and effort that goes into kind of learning the skills of good presentation. And I think we probably all felt it actually listening to kind of Morgan and Andy, and I'm a bit sort of like nervous, certainly following in Morgan's footsteps after such a brilliant presentation. So what I wanted to do, being playful and provocative, is just to kind of ask you to kind of sit back and think about your story. And I'm just going to give you like a sort of a few easy pointers, I guess, to kind of reflect on. So the first one is thinking about what you might call your origin story and your call to adventure. Now, if you're kind of out there as an entrepreneur, people want to know who the hell you are, and you've got to establish your credibility quickly. So your role as a kind of a mentor, your role as a leader within that business, your role as kind of chief exec, if you're pitching for money, you've got to be able to demonstrate all of your expertise, but all of your leadership qualities as well. And for a lot of this, you want to be sort of drawing on some of the kind of values, the behaviors, the beliefs that you've got, the things that we in the UK tend to keep hidden. Now, if anyone's tried to work out who that photo is, it is of Elon Musk. There's a few kind of like nods. Now, I know he's a kind of a Marmite character. You either love him or hate him. But arguably, he's not just the US's greatest industrialist of the last kind of centuries, kind of the world's. And a lot of what he's been able to do is built not just upon his engineering skills and his innovation, but it's built upon his vision of the future, his kind of promise. And a lot of that starts with his origin story. And what amused me watching this, as he came over from South Africa and he landed in Silicon Valley, he used to tell, and you can go and find the kind of videos of this with him and his kind of Zip2 in his kind of PayPal days, stories about being a 12-year-old who built his own computer game and then sold it for $500. It's called Blast Stars. You can still play it. The problem with that in Silicon Valley is that everyone or every other person is a 12-year-old who's built their own computer game and kind of sold it for $500. So he needed to dig a bit deeper. So actually he then started telling a different story, which was as a 6-year-old boy being scared of the dark. And we can all relate to that, until he was able to cure himself of being scared of the dark by literally pulling the encyclopedia off the shelf and reading about the science, the definition of what darkness is, the absence of photons. And what a ridiculous reason to be scared of the dark. So sort of, been able to kind of move on from there. So I'm being playful, as I said, but it's one of those things, the origin stories, the call to adventure, the eureka moment, the things that some entrepreneurs are good at, like a James Dyson talking about the industrial sawmill he saw whipping off sawdust on an industrial estate and a kind of wood factory that inspired his Hoover. But many of us kind of like miss this, but it's super useful. Another element of kind of story of ambition. And this is your kind of vision of the future. And again, riffing on Musk's story, he likes to be big and bold. As we've kind of said, big and bold tends to go down well in the US. A vision for the future in 2050 is dying on Mars. But it doesn't have to be that. Being an interplanetary species means saving this planet as well as kind of moving on to Mars. And when he talks about what the world looks like in 2050, he's able to use the evocative, nostalgia-based stories that lots of Americans sort of believe in around, the kind of 1950s house and the white picket fence. It's just got the solar tiles on the roof and the kind of Tesla parked out the front. So being able to be bold and kind of stating your ambition is absolutely kind of key for being, spotted, having your kind of profile, but then also kind of bringing people along with you, whether that's employees or whether it's partners, and particularly when you're going to be managing relationships when you're not physically on the ground in the States, like having that sort of strength of and clarity of mission is absolutely kind of key. And then there's another kind of element kind of story which goes down particularly well in the US, which is the story of momentum and the story of adversity. And in storytelling for a lot of British entrepreneurs, everything is perfect, and sometimes you wonder why they're stood up in front of investors asking for anything at all, because they've painted this like perfect picture, whereas actually you need to be asking for help. and asking for help is a good thing, because change is hard. And if you're trying to do something that is difficult, then there are going to be challenges, there's going to be struggle, and there's going to be jeopardy. And people really lean into that. They really kind of like that. So owning the adversity is something that, is second nature in the US. Certainly if the Bay Area, you're nothing if you haven't had 3-4 startup failures before you're kind of pitching, the next one. So, the clock is up there again for Musk. Everything for him around momentum is a race against time. So whether it's kind of giving your blueprint for the EVs out to the kind of market to kind of move the market quicker, or whether it's kind of a race against time to kind of get off this planet or fix this planet, super helpful and a big kind of galvanizing force, and certainly a way that you can ask for forgiveness too. So there's some just tips about things that you can add to kind of your story. But of course, you're going over there, and the most important story is their story. When you're trying to influence someone, you need to know what they're already telling themselves. And that really is the most important story of all. And for anyone who's a fan of behavioral economics, or, our number 10 nudge unit and kind of what they're up to, or what the big advertisers are doing, it's all comes from a singular place of understanding that we are irrational and emotional decision makers. The science is out. We don't like to believe it, but we are not logical and rational. We might be in the way that we approach engineering or kind of science, but not when it comes to kind of making decisions. And because we've been telling stories for hundreds of thousands of generations, we've got a finely tuned, narrative hungry, pattern seeking story brain. So the question that you should be asking yourself before every engagement with someone in the US is, what story are they telling themselves already about your innovation and area? Sometimes this is massively to our advantage. So I always kind of ask this kind of question when we're out in the States, and we're seen as lousy entrepreneurs. We're seen as people that don't ask for enough money, and we're seen as people that exit too early. On the flip side of that, we're seen as excellent scientists, engineers, R&D. There's elements here that you can kind of completely play up and kind of make the most of. Just wanted to kind of give an example as well about how quickly these stories could change, as well as how powerfully they shape the narrative of business, the narrative of culture, the narrative of politics in the States. So everyone's heard of the American dream, and it has such a kind of pervasive influence. And it was something that Trump was able to use to kind of great effect, literally by pinning the blame on liberal elite politicians in Washington for stopping people from being able, good ordinary Americans, for being able to achieve the American dream. Drain the swamp. That was the kind of route forward. Now, that story was incredibly powerful, even if he wasn't told like that. That's the drive of populism. That's the kind of narrative he's kind of like tapping into. We all know from a logical and rational basis, if you look at the facts and figures about social mobility and kind of getting ahead, like if you want kind of equality, and if you want opportunities, you don't want to be setting up in America. You want to be, moving to Denmark. But that doesn't stop the kind of power of the American dream. And when we think about what's happened now and Biden, you can see how quickly that American dream has been reinterpreted and kind of replayed out. And all the things that Andy was saying that are so exciting, that now, kind of climate is all about infrastructure. It's all about jobs. So that's, how can you argue against that as a, if you're looking to kind of make America great again? It's very difficult to argue against, to be a climate denier when it's about sort of building jobs. And then I'm really looking forward to Earth Day on April the 22nd, because I think we're going to see something on the scale of kind of like JFK. This is my dream for the American dream, for the rest of the planet, the rest for us. You know, the big opportunity here in kind of re-engaging with the rest of the world is kind of setting up, you know, the kind of race to kind of net zero, you know, kind of echoing the race to the moon and the space race. And then it becomes really fun for all of us as storytellers, because, you know, if there's a race, we need to know who's in it. We need to know, you know, why we're in it, like what's worth winning, you know, are we winning, who's losing? Like all of these things are going to become sort of gold dust for kind of storytelling, and things that you need to be thinking about when you're looking for your innovation to become a solution to somebody's problem, and you're looking to kind of wrap that up in story. So that's my view on the world after kind of 20 years of kind of working in storytelling and 10 years of kind of helping kind of clean tech people. Really believe that if you kind of crack that story as strategy, you will find it much easier to kind of win the support that you need early on in the US. It will work, you know, if nothing else, incredibly hard for you when you're not there. If people are able to kind of tell a story about you and kind of pass that story on in a memorable and compelling way, then you've kind of got everything in front of you. On that note, wrapping up, you know, the other way of that we've started to kind of look at Silicon Valley, which is the kind of area that we kind of hit up the most. It's not just the epicenter of innovation. It's not just the investment capital of the world. It's also the story capital of the world. And you only need to kind of look at some of those kind of unicorns and how that funding is allocated on kind of what promises, you know, to kind of realize that. And the last couple of slides, and I think they're going to be shared, they're just kicking off points. So if you're interested in any of this, grab any one of these books and you'll be off and away. Thanks.
Guy, thank you very much indeed for that. A real personal insight into the various missions that you've had to the US over the years. I can certainly relate to some of what you were saying. I know that when we have speakers from the SME community, where they give that sort of heartfelt overview about their business and the fact they were looking for funding and they had to, you know, speak to their family and you know, remortgage their house and all that sort of thing, that really draws and gets the attention of the audience. So I fully understand what you're suggesting there. So thank you very much for that.